ties in with Rupert Sheldrake's stuff too, and I was thinking of idiot savants too, how they, with their minds as an antenna, tapping into this incredible knowledge that there's no way they could have ever learned.
Yes, well, I count myself among their number, without doubt. No, that's the only way. I mean, that is how I explain my career, because it has, fundamentally a mathematical basis that's very solid and beyond reproach by all but the most stalwart. And yet, clearly, I'm some kind of cannabis-smoking lunatic. So how did that happen? Well, it's just the principle of the idiot savant, I think. And that nature is knowable. If you're God's fool, the secret will be given over to you. I mean, it's everywhere. It's in every drop of water. Everything has it in it. That was the alchemical faith, and it's the fractal faith as well.
I have a question about the antenna thing, because I understand it in terms of picking up certain ideas or whatever. But when you talk about receiving specific memories that you, as a single entity, have experienced. So is you as an entity have experienced this thing, and now it's just floating out there in whatever.
You mean, does it actually call you up and say, "Hey, you"? Is it like that?
How is it? What is it that produces that one's? I mean, I can imagine receiving certain things that are cultural or Gaian, whatever. But when you receive, you're talking about your own personal memory of stubbing your toe 8 years ago. Why is that floating around?
Oh, I see what you're saying. Well, this is the great problem for all theories of memory. We know that if you live to be 70 years old, that every molecule in your body will be exchanged approximately 10 times. Well, then how is it that a 70-year-old woman can remember what it was like to be taken in the arms of her grandmother and the smell of the perfume that the old lady wore? I mean, that is just an absolute mystery. And if you're a hardcore materialist, and God knows they're around somewhere, probably not here, but if you're a hardcore materialist, then you say, well, something must persist. And if we could figure out the one thing that persists, then we'd have it nailed. Well, it turns out there is something which persists. The neurons do not cycle over. You are born with a certain number of neurons, and you die with a few less, depending on your drug-taking history, and they are never replaced, and they are never cycled out. Well, but then the materialists break down, because this magical substance, which you would think would help them solve their memory problems, the theories necessary to turn it into the storage side of memory are too fantastic for them to swallow. You would have to go to something like the invisible landscape, plug, to find a theory radical enough to account for that, because you would have to hypothesize molecular storage almost at the speed of a tape recorder of theoretically an entire lifetime. So 70, let's make it 35 years, because presumably you don't retain your dreams very useful. So let's say 30 years of continuous tape recording being downloaded into something under 8 angstroms in diameter with no degradation of the data stream, and so forth and so on. I mean, it becomes insupportable and fantastic in their minds, but perhaps not. I mean, nature has a peculiar way of using redundancy. Like, once nature finds a way to do something, she will tend to use that technique over and over again in different applications. We see that the problem of storage of information and retrieval of information and non-degradation of that information has all been solved in the functioning of DNA. But the information that is stored in DNA, if you talk to an information theorist, they will say, well, it's not like memory, it's not like people's faces or their addresses and telephone numbers, it's just protein synthesis. It's structures for protein synthesis, and you mustn't be so naive as to confuse this with real information and pat on the head, so forth and so on. But here we have the DNA, the central molecular machinery of life, and for reasons known to nobody, vast sections of it are what are called silent DNA. Well, what does that mean? It means those parts of the DNA don't code for proteins. Well, but maybe they code for something else. Maybe they code for memory. And maybe the so-called random or trash arrangement of nucleotides in those sections of the DNA are, in fact, our memory. I mean, memory is very mysterious, and the mechanism which explains it may involve principles at the edge of or beyond the grasp of current science. I mean, think of it. You know, I have memories going back to 8 months, and many people report memories under 3 years. And often these are movies, you know, the most highly degradable and data-dense form of image storage there is. I mean, that's why it's so maddening to store images, you know, videotape on computers today, because it's so memory intensive, as they say in the biz. And yet this seems to be how we store our memories. Let's see, what else needs to be said? Well, again, this is simply a laundry list of things, cutting-edge concerns and ideas in the realm of what I've left out, and I'll mention it, and then maybe we can knock off, are pop political ideas. I've talked to you guys before about the idea of one woman, one child. I've slightly modified it recently, or made an addendum to it, which is, I think it would be very interesting if every woman had one child. We've talked about that and the social consequences of that. But how interesting it would be then if 75% of those children were female, and that the feminization of society, I think, should not proceed through the feminization of men. It should proceed by dialing down the overall number of men in the society. And I think probably the 50-50 sexual ratio that is actually an artificial ratio maintained by crazed monogamites and their dominator stooges. Not to judge it, of course, but and that usually in large mammalian social animal groups, males are more at a premium, and so that's something I've been following and talking to people. And then lastly, and in a somewhat lighter vein, I want to urge you all to consider the Zippies and their crusade to save the soul of America, which you may not have heard of. Well, that's how it is with crusades. The Zippies are a bunch of English bohemians who are trying to launch a third British cultural wave, following in the model of the Beatles first and Malcolm McLaren and the Sex Pistols second, and now come the Zippies. And they exemplify a certain kind of syncopated house, trance, dance, techno music. And what I like about them is that they operate under the banner of what they call pronoia. And pronoia is the creeping idea that people are plotting behind your back to help you. And I see pronoia as part of the phenomenon of boundary dissolution. Things are going to get better and better because everyone, and what a zippy is basically a freak who has their shit together. Zippies are freaks, but they don't have large amounts of garbage in their apartments. Freaks who recycle, that's your typical zippy. And so they'll be making their way across country, and if you get a chance to attend any of their raves, you should do it. Raves are very good for the soul. And there's a lot of youth bashing going on in this country. And it's very weird and directed from large glass and aluminum boxes along Madison Avenue in Manhattan. There's nothing wrong with people under 25. They're fine, thank you. It's the culture that they're inheriting that is so toxic and weird that they don't know what to do with it. And somehow the response of that culture is to stigmatize them and lay down all kinds of horseshit trips about Generation X and this and that and the other thing. I really think the zippies are the real youth culture, and it's psychedelic and it's experience-based. That's the other thing, something we've preached here over and over again, that the primacy of direct experience is what life is about, not what Time magazine is telling you, but, how you feel in your body right here, right now. And, the drugs you take and the sexual acts you participate in and the things you do with your mind and body in real time. And everything else is highly abstract and not to be trusted, I think. In New York, I gave a talk for the Zippies, trying to formulate what it is, and it's mostly what it isn't. It's about not believing, not consuming, not following. It's about taking back direct experience. If we could feel our circumstance, if we could feel what we're doing to the earth and each other, we wouldn't do it. It's that simple. Because it's too horrible. But, you can anesthetize yourself with ideology, with wealth, with distance, with religious obsession, so forth and so on. And then, you can't tell shit from shinola. But pain is pain, agony is agony. There's plenty of it out there. So I think the precondition for any kind of response to that, any kind of political or reforming response to it, is to feel. And that means taking back your own social space from the machinery of media and domination and value manipulation and so forth and so on. So I live life with an immense sense of intellectual excitement and hope. That's the thing. I think there are a whole bunch of cards on the table that permit intelligent people to hope. Intelligence and cynicism, which have gone hand in hand throughout the 20th century, are no longer good company with each other. It's inappropriate. Cynicism is now inappropriate. It's déclassé. It's not chic, my dears. Something else is on the horizon. And so permitting smart people to hope, that is the goal.